Let's go to Prudence in Texas. Thank you so much, Prudence. Your thoughts this morning.
Good morning, Lurie. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
The reason that I called is a couple of days ago when Mr. Jor-El, I can't remember what his last name was.
Jor-El Caraballo.
Yes. So I was really surprised that you said, well, you look black. I'm going to call a thing. You're black, even though your last name is Hispanic, because Latino is not a race. So I was just really surprised that you called somebody something just based on how they look, which I was born and raised in Louisiana. That was done to me all my life. I was really surprised that you labeled him and pretty much erased whatever he might self-identify as.
Well, because I was reading his bio, I knew that he identified as a black man. But I knew that the audience did not have his full bio in front of them. And I know that once the audience heard their name, they would do what you have done, which is to assume he is not black or does not identify as black because he has Latin American lineage or heritage. Now, so for the audience, and I appreciate the question, Prudence, I'll come back to you in just a second. I just want to explain so that we're all on the same page. So black is a racial category. Black is a racial category that was not necessarily just created in America. Black is a racial category that describes people of African descent and heritage. American is a nationality. Ecuadorian is a nationality. Cuban is a nationality. You can be black and Ecuadorian, which means your race is black. Your nationality is Ecuadorian. You can be black and Jamaican. Your blackness is your race. Jamaican is your nationality. Now, because I also know that Prudence, let me ask you, how, of all the Africans who were taken from the continent of Africa, what percentage would you think made it here to the United States of America?
Well, a very low amount because a lot of them died down there in the bottom of the ship.
Well, okay, so a low amount. And many did die at the bottom of ships, but that's not the reason so few of them came to the United States. Out of all of the Africans who made it to the United States, less than 6% of them, let me rephrase. Out of all the Africans that made it across the transatlantic slave trade, less than 6% of them came to the United States of America. Not because the other 94% of them died in the ocean, but because the other 94% of them were enslaved by other European powers, some the same that enslaved here, but they were enslaved by other colonial European powers throughout the Americas. So if we imagine it this way, Prudence, let's say you and I, you're from Texas. Let's say you and I and all the Texas black people, we were a part of a village on the continent of Africa, right? We're a part of a village. We minding our village business. We doing good. You doing good. I'm doing good. And then that night, the slavers come in. And when the slavers come in, they put us on these traveling concentration camps, and then they start their journey. They usually would leave on a Sunday because they wanted to get the blessing of the good white Jesus. I'm not kidding. They would name their traveling concentration camps things like the Brotherhood of Jesus because they were tapping into white Jesus as a source of power. And then they would start out on the journey. Now, they didn't come directly across to the United States because that would be a waste of effort. What they would typically do is they would start on the continent of Africa and they would come down across the Atlantic and they'd start in Brazil. And they would let maybe half of us off in Brazil. Right now, we started out as a village, one village. Let's give ourselves let's call our village Blacklandia. We're the Blacklandia village in the continent of Africa. We've been captured. And now our family, our friends, people we've been related to, grandmas, aunties, uncles, all of us are on this ship. Half of us get dropped off in Brazil. Now, just because we're dropped off in Brazil doesn't mean we're not still a part of Blacklandia Village. We've just been dropped off in Brazil. The ship keeps traveling with the rest of our relatives and family and community members. And some get dropped off in Venezuela. Some get dropped off in Colombia. Some get dropped off in Jamaica. Some get dropped off in Dominican Republic and Haiti. Some get dropped off in Puerto Rico. Some get dropped off in Cuba. And the last handful of folks that's left, they're the ones that get dropped off in America. So we don't stop being Village Blacklandia simply because we have been scattered across the world. We are still family connected. Now, we are now going to be speaking additional languages because we probably spoke 3 or 4 when we were by ourselves, minding our own business. We're going to speak different languages, but we are still connected. And so that is why I, as someone who sees the Pan-African diaspora as the source of power, while it is fractured, for me, race is a category that white people created, Carl Linnaeus being one of them. White people created categories called black, white, Asian. And they were called Negroid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and these sort of terms that we avoid now. White people created those categories. So personally, Prudence, I would have never been of the perspective that those of us who might have been the last to get off those ships to make it here, that we have, one, severed our connection to the rest of the Pan-African diaspora. I know others feel differently. That's just my personal perspective. But because I know race is something white people created to divide us from them as white people, and they don't care about our geography, if I see somebody who is of African descent fully, and when y'all see the video of our conversation on YouTube, you will see that's a brother. And if you did not know his name was Jorel Carabejo, you would think his name was Hakeem Jenkins. And so for me, I would never agree to limit myself or limit my definitions by the frameworks that white people have created. So yes, if you identify as a black person, now perhaps you might be black Puerto Rican, perhaps you might be black Cuban, perhaps you might be black Jamaican, because you can also be white Puerto Rican, you can be white Cuban, you can be white Jamaican. So the very same racial categories that we have here in the United States, black, white, Latino, which is not actually a racial category, but black, white, Asian, and then Latinos, this broad ethnic group under which we put all the Latinos, regardless of whether they black as the deepest of melanated skin or if they're white as the least melanated skin. So yeah, so he's a black man. He identifies as a black man. And I said that because I knew that people like yourself who would hear his name would instantly discount what he had to say as irrelevant to the black experience. Does that make sense, Prudence?
I still think that you should have let him do that instead of you labeling him for the rest of us. That's all.
So did you hear the part where I said that he identifies as black in his bio? And I just didn't have the capacity to read it. And so because it's my show and because I have to be nuanced and nimble in how I present information. Did you hear that part of what I said, Prudence?
You're not nuanced and nimble because you didn't let him identify himself. You identified him.
Okay, so if that's now that you identified that that's your issue, did you hear the substance of what he had to say?
Yeah, I listened to your show. That's how I knew what.
Right. So do you plan on perhaps getting the Meditations for Black Men book that he wrote, the name of which is called Meditations for Black Men? Did you perhaps think that maybe it would be more important for you to see if you could get that book into the hands of the black men that you know who could benefit from it, as opposed to quibbling with how someone racially identifies?
I don't quibble with it because I've experienced it and I don't appreciate it.
Well, and that is, I respect that is how you approach the world. And perhaps you should talk about that. You should perhaps get a platform where you talk about and challenge these issues. But because I'm not just thinking about you, Prudence, because I'm not just thinking about your individualized experience, and I have to think about the whole. See, a lot of us are very comfortable thinking about ourselves as individuals without thinking about the whole. I have to think about not just you, Prudence, but the other millions of people who are also listening. So I could never curate an experience solely for you. And I would hope that in this era of recognizing the dangers of moving through the world with a self-centered and self-absorbed view of the world, that we would have a little grace for those who are trying to reach out across these artificial barriers that white people have created in order to keep us divided. Now, you can feel free to quibble with the divisions, and that is your business. I'm just going to say thank you to you for giving me an opportunity to explain the transatlantic slave trade and to hopefully speak to those who have been confused by this idea that we should in some way, shape, or form feel comfortable separating ourselves along the lines that white people have created for us. That's what I would approach this as. But I do say one day when you get your platform, Prudence, and you want to talk about why we should limit ourselves and on our identities, and you can take the trauma that you may have experienced in your life around identity and issue, and you can talk about it as much as you want. But on this show, we have a Pan-African approach to understanding blackness. And on this show, because I didn't just wake up this morning and start doing this work, I have been doing this work for decades. On this show, I got to speak to more than just those of you who are comfortable with those sorts of divisions. Because as our elders and ancestors have taught us, it is the height of foolishness to limit our advocacy and view of the world based upon the confines which those who benefit from our oppression and division have set out for us. But thank you so much. I appreciate you for calling. I will say this, considering Black Americans are one of the smallest branches of the tree. I shouldn't say the smallest branch of the tree. Black Americans represent the potential in some ways that are explosive, because we in this country, and yes, I say we, I know some of you are bothered by that because you know I have a Jamaican mother, and I know that troubles a lot of you, but I'm a Black woman. You don't have to agree with it, but I don't limit myself to according to people who would seek to divide themselves, like white people or you. or you. And so it's important that we recognize just how significantly our intentional divisions caused us as a nation to vote for a sexual assaulting, pussy grabbing felon who is not reformed in any way, shape, or form, who is now putting into place people who are destroying every single bit of civil rights that we have ever known in this current era. So unfortunately, I just cannot join you in this effort to quibble with the identity politics that are based on plantation politics, because that's the type of plantation politic that would undermine a Denmark Vesey, that would undermine a David Walker, that would undermine all of our ancestors who did the work of making sure that we would be better off than we were. But thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. Look, yeah, I didn't even get it. I didn't even know we was going to have that lesson today. Look at God. Let's thank God for prudence. Don't y'all talk about her the way I see y'all talk about her online. Don't you do it. We're going to appreciate her, because what the devil meant for evil, the Lord has meant for our good.